Many times we don't understand the law. Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas, here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Hey guys, thank you so much for rejoining us here on Law for the People with your host, me, Eric Cedillo. Want to re-thank, of course, Sasha Moreno for coming on. It was a real delight to have talked to her at length and kind of get a sense of what she's doing and what she's all about. My next guest, I'm very interested in talking to. I don't know if I'm going to call it an interview so much as kind of get a sense of what Mr. Chris Hamilton is running for, what this is kind of includes. So I'm just going to kind of jump in and have Mr. Hamilton explain what it is he's running for, and then maybe just a little bit of who he is.
Yeah, great. So thanks for having me. I'm running for chair of the Dallas County Democratic Party, which is on the primary ballot. That early voting has already started. Last day to vote is March 6th. The chair is the leader of the local county party. And I think the role is one that is underappreciated, but perhaps the most important position in Dallas County over the next couple of election cycles, because the responsibility of the chair fundamentally is to be the steward for all Democrats and to try to help elect the entire ballot and to try to increase voter participation. There are a lot of pieces or components of that, but fundamentally Texas is in the situation that we're in because of extremely low voter participation. Texas is not a Republican state, it's a non-voting state. And so the role of the chair is to try to increase voter participation across the board, and I think that is my number one goal when elected.
Explain that to the listeners, Chris. A non-voting state. Tell us about that. What does that mean? Do the numbers kind of play that out or reflect that? Why is that?
For sure. So in the last governor's election in 2014, we had a 33% participation rate. That means that only 1 in 3 eligible voters in Texas voted. It's one of the worst in the country. We have the same demographics as California, which is perhaps the most progressive state in the country. Right. The difference is simply turnout, the number of people that go vote. And so that's what needs to change in Texas. And I just don't accept that our poor voter participation is inevitable. I think it is the result of intentional tactics by Republicans. I also think it's the result of failures by the Democratic Party. And so I think it's the single most important thing that we need to do as people who care about the future of our state and our country is to do everything we can to increase voter participation.
Yeah, definitely want to get into that. Some of the tactics the Republicans have done, and of course, some of the things that I think we can do better as Democrats. We're going to get into that in our second segment. Before we do that, I'd like the listeners to kind of get a sense of who Chris Hamilton is, what you're all about. Some people may be hearing your name for the first time on the show. So tell us about who you are, Chris.
Well, I'm from Dallas. I was born in the Oak Cliff area, the Methodist Hospital in Oak Cliff.
I was born at Methodist.
Were you really?
Yeah, I was.
My mom was both my parents grew up in Oak Cliff. My mom was a teacher at Kimball High School. And my dad started out working on an assembly line at General Motors, was a union member. He worked the night shift at General Motors while he put himself through college, so he basically didn't sleep for about 6 years, went to graduate school as well. And then I went to public high school in Plano. After I graduated, I went to TCU, where I majored in economics and Spanish. Then I went to law school at the University of Texas in Austin, where I just really fell in love with both trying cases and, fighting causes for ordinary people. And that was something that I was really raised to focus on. And, I really appreciate and understand the huge opportunities that have been created for me through education. You've obviously experienced some of the same. And it's a tremendous privilege to be a lawyer in this society. There's a lot of resources that go into educating lawyers. And I think that a lawyer is an important position of social responsibility. What we do as lawyers has social impacts, whether we intend it or not. And so, I've really, even preceding law school, was involved in political activism. In law school, I was very involved in union organizing. In fact, helped organize a bus strike that won a new contract and some health benefits. Was involved around the time of the Iraq War in political activism. And then after I graduated from law school, came back to Dallas and started my career at Legal Aid, representing people that could not afford attorneys. And then after my work at Legal Aid, I started my own practice where I represent individuals in cases against powerful corporations and insurance companies. So
let's go back a little bit, Chris.
Yeah.
Where do you think you got that from? Where did you get that sense of community, that sense of kind of giving back? You mentioned it was kind of highlighted in college, or when you were in college. Where did that come from? Where do you think that came from?
I think it comes from the way that you're raised.
Yeah.
I think it came from my grandparents. I think it came from my parents. My granddad was a union member.
Okay.
It was actually my mom's dad worked on the assembly line at General Motors. He got my dad the job there.
Okay.
My dad's father was an electrician. And so I came, I was born when my parents were very young.
Okay.
And so my dad was still working on the assembly line and going to school at the same time when I was born. And so I just was, really raised in that, I would say, solidly middle class background. And my parents I think, made very clear to me as I was growing up how fortunate I was to have the educational opportunities that I had, and created a sense that I needed to do something to help other people, and a sense of social responsibility that we're part of a community, and that we all go up or down together, that you can't benefit at the expense of other people.
Yeah. You mentioned your dad started off on the assembly line. What don't know that you kind of got into what he's done since and some of the things that he's kind of accomplished.
Yeah. So my dad recently was awarded was the first man to win the Susan B. Anthony Award from the League of Women Voters. He is in real estate, and in particular affordable housing, and he's really become a pioneer in affordable housing in this sense. There is, a lot of our mainstream political dialogue has focused on tax subsidized developments, creating new developments in affordable housing. And the problem with this is that it's just not a viable solution for the scope of the problem.
Right.
And it is just not possible, given the gross levels of income inequality in this country, to solve the affordable housing crisis with new construction. And so what he has done is focused on acquiring older properties that often are very problematic, crime-ridden, some of the most worst properties in the southern sector of Dallas, and tried to invest in and transform those properties as opposed to gentrifying them, to raise the quality of life for the existing tenant base, and to often providing housing for people that are really on the margins of society that may otherwise be facing homelessness. And to do that, what he discovered is it's not really the physical quality and the physical rehabilitation of the buildings is just the starting point. What you've really got to do is focus on the community and the quality of life. And so where he's really pioneered is in developing after-school programs, GED programs, free rent for nonprofits and churches. He and my mom run one of the largest private food banks in North Texas. And so if you contact the North Texas Food Bank, you may very well get sent to one of their properties. And then he also has directly invested or donated in the public school system in Dallas, in particular with a focus on the Roosevelt feeder system. And the point he makes is this: if you look across Dallas, property values are directly linked to the quality of the public schools. And so his pitch to other entrepreneurs and business people is, look, you should invest in public schools even just based on your own self-interest. And this is the sort of thing where not only do we benefit others, but we can help ourselves and lift up the entire community by investing in public education. So he has donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the DISD school system in a way that is, I think, even disproportionate to his resources. So he also, another little piece of the story, he nearly died from cancer in 2007. And he had always been, I think, kind of a forward-thinking person.
Yeah.
But after he recovered from that, he just basically started giving all of his money away and really focusing on the community. And he said the amazing thing that he figured out is everything that he gives away comes back 10 times. And so that's a perspective that has impacted me in a significant way.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I'd like to meet your dad at some point. I did see that award he received, and I was just amazed at the things he was doing. Kind of puts everything into perspective. Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yeah. So I have a younger brother who works with my dad.
Yeah.
And then I have a younger sister who is a nurse at Cook's Children's Hospital in Fort Worth.
Okay. And you mentioned your mom works with your dad in some functional capacity.
She helps run the food banks. And then she also runs the lawn crews for all of his properties.
Okay.
And another thing that they really have, they are probably one of the largest second chance employers in the southern sector of Dallas. They have a lot of employees who may have prior criminal histories, but who are very high-functioning, contributing members of society now, and who may not otherwise have had employment opportunities. And so my mom runs the lawn crew, which she kind of built from scratch, and does a pretty impressive job with it. Yeah.
Very cool.
And they've also helped put up some signs for the campaign and that sort of stuff as well.
That can always be helpful.
Yes,
you recruit the family and help them. You mentioned you came out of law school and started with legal aid. Started with legal aid. Yeah. In all honesty, I know most people don't think I'm going to come out of law school and start at legal aid. What was kind of your thinking at the time?
They do this thing in a law school called on-campus interviewing, where they have like all the corporate jobs, the big firm jobs. Everybody wanted those, and I just was not interested.
Yeah.
And so I just never really was particularly motivated by money. I mean, resources are important in politics or in what we do fighting against large corporations, but I think there's things that are a lot more important than just your personal self-interest. And so, I don't know, I wanted to help other people. I had a great opportunity. I mean, I went into court and tried little cases several days a week, so it was a great learning opportunity for me as well. But I just, I've been a cause fighter my whole life, and even now, I think the cases we do, we say that we only take cases we'd be willing to do for free, because sometimes, as you know, that may happen. Yeah,
happens a whole lot. Married?
Yes. My incredible wife, who I met in law school, she is a lawyer and really runs the law firm. And so I would not be able to do this public service opportunity as county chair if it were not for what my wife does running the law firm. And she's just incredible. We've got a very complementary skill set. We don't really do the same types of things, but she is very effective at systems, organizations, personnel management, and so I'm really fortunate, not just at home but also at the office.
Oh, good for you. I've got the same setup at my house, so that's always good to hear. You got any kiddos?
Yeah, 5-year-old son.
5-year-old son?
Yeah.
5-year-old.
A redhead.
Is that right? Yeah. 5-year-old son. That's wonderful. I've got a 10-year-old son, so I kind of know where you're at right now in terms of the
What's your son's name?
My son's junior.
Junior.
So yeah, he is, of course, our fourth. We had 3 daughters, and we finally had a son. So, okay, Chris, we're going to come back. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I really want to get into what it is you're running for. I know we had mentioned kind of generally what the chair is all about in terms of what it is, and I think for a lot of us, quite honestly, it doesn't kind of jump out at us. You know, we know judges, and we know people running for rep and other things, kind of what they do. I really want to touch on what this is and how it's going to affect the party,
Right.
and why you're doing it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that in a couple of minutes, but let's take a quick break. And please don't go anywhere. Stay tuned here at Law for the People, and we'll be back in about 2 minutes.
The law offices of Eric Cedillo, a professional corporation, a firm that handles legal matters in personal injury, auto and truck accidents, wrongful death, on-the-job injuries, criminal felony and misdemeanor, family law, divorce, and child custody. The law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, at 214-740-1628. That's 214-740-1628. Find them on the web at CedilloLaw.com. That's CedilloLaw.com.
Many times we don't understand the law. Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas. Here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Hey guys, thank you so much for rejoining us. I know y'all really enjoy that music during the breaks. I certainly do. Sitting here tapping my feet, and I just learned earlier that Fernando's a dancer. I had no idea he actually taught dance. There's a lot of things you learn over a period of time, right, Fern? But once again, we're here with Mr. Chris Hamilton, of course, who's running for the Democratic chair, Dallas County Democratic chair. I think, Chris, we talked or touched upon generally what the chair does, but let's talk specifically about the importance of the chair. You're not running for a particular office that you're going to hold, except you're kind of bringing all of these together. Tell us a little bit about that and kind of why you wanted to do that.
Yeah, I think fundamentally what I saw as a Democrat who's been involved in politics for a long time and as an activist that really felt kind of a call to service after Trump was elected, like a lot of people, is that it just didn't really feel like there was anybody looking at the big picture for Democrats in what I think is probably the most important Democratic county in the country, looking at Dallas County. And so I think Dallas County, from the Women's March to, in particular, the fight against the Muslim ban at DFW Airport, started to really display a leadership role with an unprecedented level of grassroots activity here in Dallas, but it was occurring outside of the party. The Democratic Party wasn't at the airport. The Democratic Party wasn't at the SB4 protest. The Democratic Party wasn't at the rally against white supremacy. And so there was really a lack of leadership in terms of corralling all of this energy and bringing it into the political process to do the one thing that can change people's lives, which is to get folks to vote, to get high-quality, forward-thinking, progressive leaders voted into office. And so the role of the chair is to have a vision and strategy for all Democrats, to recruit candidates, which is not a process to be taken lightly. If you want to get the highest quality candidates, you can't just see who shows up. You can't wait till the last minute. It's a years-long process for people to prepare to enter public service in a lot of instances, particularly if you want to become a Court of Appeals justice and you're going to have to shut down your law practice. So candidate recruitment is critical. Expanding the ranks of the party, opening the doors. This is an area where the current party is, not to be overly critical, but is really falling short. There's become kind of an exclusive attitude where it's operated like a club where you have to show up and prove your worth, as opposed to what we really should be doing is not a you need to come to us attitude, but a we have an obligation to come to you attitude. Everyone is included. Everyone is welcome. Even if you disagree with us on certain issues, if you want to fight fundamentally for fairness, equality, freedom, the basic American values, you have a spot in the Democratic Party. And so I think we need to, rather than expect the community come to the party, to take the Democratic Party into the community and show folks what we stand for and why they should become involved. And then the overarching picture is that we have to really have a bolder vision of what's possible in terms of voter participation. I saw repeatedly the current leadership and establishment of the party saying that certain seats were unwinnable. that I clearly believed were winnable, and really taking the low levels of voter participation as inevitable, as opposed to something that we need to fight to change. And so in sum, the Democratic Party chair is the one who is responsible for guiding the big picture. And I think that Dallas County has a leadership role to play in Texas. And I think if we want to turn Texas into the democratic state that it should be, that really has to begin with some changes in Dallas County.
Yeah. Let's talk about when you say Dallas County being one of the most important spots in terms of the country. People, okay, well, he's kind of overstating. Not really. Tell us why that is. Why is it so important that Dallas, you talk about Texas, the state of Texas, you talk about Texas, of course, on the national electoral scale. Talk about those numbers, Chris, in terms of what the reality is or the importance of Dallas County.
Well, Dallas County is one of the 10 largest Democratic counties in the country. The DFW Metroplex, or North Texas, is the largest metroplex in the country that is in a Republican-held state, that is in a red state. The entire country is looking at Texas, and I'm sure you and some of the listeners have seen the articles over the last year talking about America's future is Texas, both in terms of the demographic shifts and looking at the electoral picture. When Texas votes for Democratic presidents and our electoral votes go to a Democratic candidate, the presidential picture is over for a generation. And so the whole country is looking at Texas. The Dallas County is is a very large urban county that has a lot of Republican-held seats. Of the 10 state house seats that are identified as swing districts in 2018, 7 of the 10 in Texas are in Dallas County. We have our Court of Appeals is the most influential and has the largest docket of any Court of Appeals in Texas. The Dallas Court of Appeals is 13 out of 13 Republicans. I think if we have new leadership at the party, those are poised to flip. 8 of those seats can become Democratic seats in 2018. And so that really, the state needs these changes in Dallas County, and these 7 state house seats in Dallas County have the potential to really transform what happens at the next session of the legislature, where we're not likely to have a majority, but 7 seats will dramatically impact what comes out of committees. Yeah. And so I think that, and then the last piece is that any opportunity to win statewide elections for Texas involves a margin of over 100,000 votes in Dallas County. And then when you look at counties like Tarrant County, which have more Democrats than Republicans but have a voter participation problem, Collin County, which is shifting Democratic faster than any county in the state of Texas, these are all bordering counties. And so we have, with the overlapping districts and seats, the potential to really start a wildfire in Dallas County that could turn and flip the state over the next couple of election cycles.
Yeah, flipping the state, that's something that is a possibility. We talk about the numbers. You mentioned earlier some of the things, one, what we're not doing as a party, and then also some of the things the Republicans have been doing over the last few years to kind of prevent that. Let's talk a little bit about that. One of them being, of course, voter ID laws. That kind of have a dampening effect on people coming out, especially young people, especially people who have, these voter identification requirements. The 7 that they have listed in terms of what's there. Not all young people have a driver's license. Anything that can dampen the ability to acquire a Texas identification, a concealed handgun license. I mean, who are the demographics receiving these things that they're allowing? Why not student identification? Why not some of the other things that would allow us to vote? Let's talk a little bit about that in terms of is there an obligation on the Democratic chair to kind of fight these things in the courts? What does that look like?
So from a legal perspective, the 2 most significant things that Republicans have done to suppress voter turnout are voter ID laws and then disenfranchisement through redistricting or gerrymandering, the way that they draw the lines. And so those are the key pieces. obviously, the Democratic Party and progressives more broadly need to be fighting against voter ID laws, fighting against gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is where they draw districts so that Republicans get disproportionate representation, and they're fundamentally taking away the one person, one vote, basic right in the Constitution. And so the problem that we have is the Republicans have done a really good job of stacking the courts. And so fighting these laws in courts is really challenging. And so that's where, the only real solution is just to get people to the polls and to increase participation. And so what we have to look at there is also some of the tactics that are not so much legal tactics but political tactics that the Republicans have used to suppress voter participation. One of them is this divide and conquer tactic that Trump has taken to an unprecedented level of attacking Latino communities, attacking African American communities, attacking Muslim communities, LGBT, to try to really divide folks and create a tribalistic infighting that prevents us from building the coalition that we need to transform the state. Latinos, African Americans, progressive, forward-thinking whites with Muslims, Asians, LGBT, Native Americans, that is a 2/3 majority in Texas. But by getting us fighting against each other rather than working together, that suppresses participation. And then you have these disinformation and misinformation campaigns like what we saw with the Mueller indictments against the Russians. And I think the biggest takeaway there was that the primary and most effective thrust or intent of the Russian scheme to interfere with our election was to suppress the African American vote by turning African Americans off on Democratic candidates. And so what the Republicans do is make folks just get fed up with the system, feel like it doesn't matter, feel like the Democratic candidates aren't going to help them either. And so, we fight that by making sure that we put forward progressive candidates and that we educate voters. And we have to avoid devolving into the Republican tactics of ripping each other apart. Yeah. And that's an area where I think we really need new leadership and new vision in our local party, is because there's a culture of divisiveness and infighting, and we need to make sure that we're running primary campaigns that increase. Primary means the election to decide which Democrat will go against the Republican in the general election. Yeah. And so when we engage in negative and misleading attacks in the primaries, as my opponent has done against me in this primary, it turns off voters. We know that. And so in order to fight these Republican tactics, what we've got to do is run positive campaigns that lift up all Democrats and focus on the issues and show folks that we're going to fight for things that are going to change their lives and affect the issues that they care about, like public education for their kids, access to health care, good jobs. Those basic things, when we stay on those issues, we're going to win elections.
Yeah. Let's look at the logistics, Chris. What does the, some people just kind of listening in, even, being from Dallas, what does the Democratic chair in terms of what it can do? Is there a staff, or there are people there? What does it kind of look like? I know generally what the responsibilities are, but what does that look like in terms of, because what you're saying makes absolute sense. The question for me would be, how are you going to do it? How's it get started?
Great. So the party needs some level of professional staff, and I think we need a more professional approach with the party. Okay. But the party is comprised of elected precinct chairs, Democratic precinct chairs who are responsible for organizing their individual precincts. Right now, of the 770 precincts in Dallas County, more than 300 of them do not have a Democratic precinct chair. So the party has really just, particularly in the southern sector of the county, allowed high voting precincts to go without precinct chairs. So we're going to have to make some increases in the quality of our staff. We're going to have to fill these precinct chair seats with the next generation of folks that are leaders in their communities, not just somebody's going to do whatever the chair wants them to do, but who really are going to do the work to organize their communities. And fundamentally, if you want to take a non-voter and turn them into a voter, you have to be as close to them as we are in this room. You have to touch them with a live communication. A TV ad does not turn a non-voter into a voter. It might persuade a voter to go one direction or the other.
Right.
Same thing with a phone call, right? So we have to do what we call canvassing, which is getting out into neighborhoods. And that is going to be done both with paid staff that help to organize it, as well as with precinct chairs that need to really get into the fabric of their communities.
Yeah.
Know the schools, know the barbershops, know the grocery stores, know the community leaders. And it's a back to basics approach, and it also needs to be a year-round approach. One of the spots we really go wrong is folks are fed up with us showing up 3 weeks before an election and saying, oh, here I am in the community, right? And so that's one of the things that I've tried to do with our campaign is to get off the beaten path, not just track to the events that all of the traditional participants go to, but try to get out and touch communities. And that is not an easy process. It takes a long time. And it's one of the reasons that we've come up short in the Latino communities is because we have historically poor voter participation by Latinos. That's no secret. The good news is we're seeing meaningful improvement in Latino participation in the Democratic primary in Dallas this time, really for the first biggest improvements we've seen. But we've got to get off those lists of, quote, likely voters that we get from the standard consultants and go out and engage new voters. And we've seen some examples, for example, in Victoria Nieve's campaign, that this works. The Latino Center for Leadership Development, Miguel Solis, George Baldor have done a lot of work in this area. And we know what we need to do, but we've got to, we can't just show up right before the elections. And so one of the things that I want to do in 2019, which is an off year, is to really expand our focus on engagement in the Latino communities, because this is the area where there is ground for most improvement. And this is also the community that really needs our help with the attacks that are going on that are really dividing and ripping apart families. And the challenge that we have is that some of these tactics that Trump is using make it harder for Latinos to participate in politics, because often Latino communities are mixed with folks with varying immigration statuses, right? And so that makes it more difficult to publicize events and to do the types of things that allow us to engage the communities. And so that's why I say we can't say, hey, you need to come to us, where have you been? We need to say, we need to go to you, where have we been? And the where have you been question is something that new participants constantly get from the current Democratic Party. And, you know, my pastor says, I don't care what your week's been like, what your life's been like, or what you look like, you're welcome here. That's what we need inside the Democratic Party, and we need to go out into the communities and really reach people where they're at instead of expecting them to come to us.
Totally agree. How do you do that with what we have in terms of monies? Because, you know, in all honesty, it takes monies to do certain things, to do outreach and other things. You talk about, you know, paid staffers and things of that nature. But even, you know, acquiring people who want to come and help and do perhaps, you know, spots on Spanish television, Spanish radio, things that we can reach out into the community, takes money. Tell me some things. You know, I wouldn't imagine it's going to be Chris Hamilton going to everything, doing everything on his own. What does that look like? How might that differ in terms of what the current state of affairs is with our Democratic chair and party, and some things that you would do differently to perhaps fundraise, perhaps, you know, acquire more monies to do the things that you're talking about? Well,
right now we're kind of in an upside down scenario where, because of the weakness of the local party, the fundraising focus is all on the candidates. So the candidates have to get out the vote. The candidates have to be a party unto themselves, right? And that is extremely inefficient. And so the dollars are out there, but we need a reallocation of the dollars for certain key functions. The role of the Democratic Party is to turn out the base vote. The candidate should not have to worry about the base Democratic vote. Right. The candidates should be going to swing voters. Right. The party can also coordinate between different candidates in the way that the candidates are not allowed to. So, for example, when we have a congressional seat like Pete Sessions, District 32, we also have House District 102, House District 108, House District 114 that are all or almost all inside that district. And so with a more effective and functioning party, we can coordinate and pool resources in a way that is much more efficient rather than kind of, stepping on each other's toes and doing the same work. And so one of the key things that we're going to have to do is really show that new leadership to the donors and explain to donors how the biggest return on investment is going to be in pushing that base vote at the party level. And until we've done that, it's wasteful to just throw money at individual campaigns without having that base vote taken care of. And so the analogy that I use with donors, large and small, is that would you do a kitchen renovation on a house that has no foundation? The first thing you do with a house is you build a foundation, and then once you've got that, everything else can come from there. And so there's no magic tricks for fundraising, but we have to convince donors that we will be good stewards of their money, that there will be a return in terms of electoral victories. And I also think we need to really increase the small and medium donor fundraising. Historically, white males have dominated political donorship. And, then guess who sees the benefits of policies, right? And so we have to convince folks that, it's important to give $3, $5 a month to the Democratic Party if you care about the qualities of your public schools, if you want access to health care. And if we develop that type of mentality and get people participating, we're going to have a party that is much more responsive to people, because political organizations always weigh in favor of responsiveness to donors. That's a two-way street. We've got to engage smaller donors, which will make our organizations more responsive to those constituents. And again, I think there's no shortcuts to this, but it is fundamentally something that we need to get back to the basics on, do the work. And I do think small donor fundraising is the future of a progressive Democratic Party if we want to see the types of changes that we need. But that doesn't mean that we don't need donors with resources that have progressive values to be joining us as well.
Absolutely. All right, Chris, we have a couple of minutes. I want to talk about the process. We're in the middle of early voting. It started this past Tuesday. Tell us a little bit about what's about to happen. I know we have a March 6th voter day, but tell us what people need to do in terms of what it looks like for those listening in the Dallas County area, what it looks like, what we have left, and when they can get out and vote.
Right. So they can get out to vote as soon as the show is over, if they haven't already. The early voting ends March 2nd. I think we really need to stop calling it early voting. It's voting. The benefit of voting prior to March 2nd is that you can vote at any polling location in Dallas County. It can be near where you work. It doesn't have to be by where you live. Early voting ends March 2nd, and then the last day to vote is March 6th. On March 6th, you have to vote in your precinct. And the problem with waiting until March 6th is that if there are any issues like ID we mentioned earlier, or your address is wrong, you could end up having to cast a provisional ballot, which may or may not be counted. And so it's really important to go vote early so that if there are any issues, that you make sure that we can get those fixed by Election Day. The other thing is that as candidates, we get reports of who votes. And so once we know someone has voted, we can stop using resources on getting that voter to the polls. So the sooner people vote, the more it allows the campaigns to use their resources to get folks to the polls who have not voted yet. And so that is critically important. Great news we've seen is record turnouts in the Democratic primary in Dallas County, including record participation by Latinos. In fact, significant increases in voter participation by Latinos who have never voted in a Democratic primary before, as well as a large number of voters really from all demographics participating that have never voted in a Democratic primary before. That's around 20% of voters so far. Then another 30% of the voters have voted in one Democratic primary or less, which means they've probably never voted in a midterm Democratic primary like this one before. And so come join these waves of people who are coming out to elect progressive leaders that can help transform our communities. I think one of the most exciting things we have is when folks show up to vote in the Democratic primary in Dallas County, you are going to have people on the ballot that are not career insiders. They are not lifetime politicians. A lot of these folks have answered the call of duty based on what's going on in this country over the last year or so. And so we really do have some people's candidates that are on the ballot that I think can transform our government.
Yeah, very important spot that you're running for. I would encourage anyone listening that's interested, go to DallasCountyVotes.org. You can get a sample ballot. It's a relatively lengthy one. Chris, we were kind of kidding around earlier about where to find you on the ballot. It's towards the end. So work your way through that ballot. Incredibly important. Look for your name, Chris Hamilton, and vote for him for Dallas County Chair. He's got a whole lot of incredibly progressive things that'll just work for the Democratic Party. So thank you so much for coming out today. Really appreciate it. Some things that Chris didn't mention. You know, he was at the fore in terms of the travel ban that was implemented. He was out at the airports. This guy truly lives by, what he preaches. So we'd encourage you guys to get out there and vote. And remember, starting tomorrow, I believe the polls are open from 7 to 7 till the end of early voting. Then, of course, March 6th is the big day. So get out there and vote. Thank you so much, Mr. Hamilton, for coming out today and talking with us. Get out there and vote. Incredibly important. Thank you so much for joining us today on Law for the People. Every Friday from 1 to 3. Please join us again next Friday, and you guys have a wonderful weekend. Thanks, Fern.
The law offices of Eric Cedillo, a professional corporation, a firm that handles legal matters in personal injury, auto and truck accidents, wrongful death, on-the-job injuries, criminal felony and misdemeanor, family law, divorce, and child custody. The law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, at 214-740-1628. That's 214-740-1628. Find them on the web at CedilloLaw.com. That's CedilloLaw.com.